just FYI, I'm in the process of launching out the YouTube live stream.
I'm
going to go shut a door.
Huh. I'm trying to figure out how to get back in. I'm somehow.
Now, if we can hear you, so you're here. If you look down in the bottom left, do you see the stop video? Like there's a mute button.
Well, I think, no, I can only see one person at a time now. I was trying to bring up my copy of the audit report. So I did that and I minimized things to get there. But now, for example, I'm getting all these commercials. I'm getting whoever's speaking, I get their picture, but I don't see anything else. I wonder if I have to get back out or something. I don't.
You might want to jump back out and jump back in. We've got
Okay,
time.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once you're in, there's no getting out.
I can hear you and I can see the single person speaking, but let me see what happens. Huh, leave and join. Maybe I'll do that.
It should look different now, Charmaine. We can see you. I don't know if you can hear us yet.
Jeff, was the audit report under a separate email?
Yes, that should have come from Sherry.
Right. I sent you a copy of the audit report, but Tom is going to be making a presentation, which will probably be a little easier to follow than actually looking at the audit report itself.
So if we want, I will, we're not quite started yet, but I'm going to start sharing my screen for the audit report. Get ready to do that just so we're prepared. Make sure. Okay.
All right, we all ready to get going here, you think?
I think so. Well, Harmeet can jump in. That's fine. But he's
Okay.
he's the only way who's not here right now.
All right, we'll give him a couple minutes. Did you hear from him either way?
I did not hear from him. Oh, he's jumping in. I can see him coming on now.
Great. Okay, awesome. Great. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. We'll call the Monday, November 9th, 2020 Board of Trustees meeting to order. And the first order of business would be public participation. Jeff, I don't know if you have anything on the web.
We have no public participation for the evening.
Okay, then we'll go right into the annual financial audit presentation.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. Good evening to all. So what we have here, and Jeff is sharing his screen, is we've been using this as a presentation format this year to try to consolidate the audit deliverables to make the presentation a little bit more efficient and a little bit more focused. So the audit deliverables actually include there's the audited financial statements, what we call a communication to those charged with governance, which would be this committee here, and then also a management letter. So those are the three audit deliverables. They've all been consolidated into this presentation document. So Jeff, I'm going to move to the next page. And here's what we'll talk about. And this is open, so if you have questions, feel free to ask as I go through. If not, at the very end, we'll see if anyone has questions at that time as well. But we'll talk about first the required communication to those charged with governance. Then we'll talk about the audit report. We also issue a report on internal control. We'll talk about the financial statements and highlight some of the key elements. Also the financial statement footnotes, some of the key or new disclosures this year. And lastly, we had one management letter comment and recommendation, and we'll talk about that. So we'll flip to the next page. So this is what the required communication, or what we refer to as an AUC 260 letter. And included in this letter is all the items that our standards say we are required to communicate to this board. So the first point, management's responsible for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies. Those policies are described in full in note 1 to the financial statements. During 1920, no new accounting policies were adopted, and the application of existing policies was not changed. Now, the financial statements include estimates, right? Everything is not an exact science. The estimates are an integral part of the financial statements, and the most sensitive estimates are, and there's 4 of them, the depreciable lives of property and equipment, our estimate and our calculation of the accrual for compensated absences. And the 3rd and 4th items are very similar. There's an actuarial calculation that we rely on in order to determine financial statement amounts for both OPEB, or other post-employment benefits. That's the 3rd bullet. And the last bullet is the net pension asset or liability related to our ERS pension system through the state. We had no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. Next slide. As part of the audit, we did have adjustments. All adjustments that were found were recorded. As I said, management corrected all such misstatements. We did not have any unrecorded or past adjustments. We did not have any disagreements with management during the course of the audit in the application of our audit procedures. After this meeting, what happens next? The board will vote to approve the financial statements. Once that happens, we're permitted to date the the audit report, and then there'll be a management representation letter with the same date that we'll send out. It's required to be signed by Jeff, by Sherry, and by Tanya. And that letter, once we get that letter back, we're permitted to release the final reports. So Jeff, I'm going to advance to the next slide. Let's talk about the report on the financial statement of the audited report. What it basically says is we've audited the financial statements of the library. that it's management's responsibility for the preparation and the fair presentation of the financial statement. So that's key. I think a lot of times people lose sight of the fact because they see the final product and it's enclosed in a cover that says Marvin and Company, that somehow that they're our financial statements. They're the library's financial statements. Yes, we assisted in the preparation of those financial statements, but the library still has responsibility for the financial statements as if they drafted those statements and those notes themselves. The library is also responsible for the design and implementation and maintenance of internal control. So then what's our responsibility? Once management's done this, our responsibility is to express an opinion on those financial statements based on our audit. Because the library is a governmental entity, we're also required to conduct the audit in accordance with government auditing standards. Our procedures are designed to obtain evidence about the amounts and the disclosures in the financial statements. We consider internal control for the purpose of designing our audit procedures, but we are not expressing an opinion on the library system of internal control. And then lastly, it's our job to evaluate the accounting policies that are used by the library and any estimates that are included in the financial statements. As a result of our audit, we issued an unmodified opinion, and what that means in layman's terms is based on the results of our audit, we have no reservations about the fairness of the numbers that follow in the financial statements. And then lastly, also included in the financial reporting package is what's referred to as required supplementary information. There's 3 schedules that are included. We'll look at those in a little bit. That's required by government auditing standards, and we do not express an opinion on that supplemental information, but as part of the audit, we do evaluate the information for consistency to the basic financial statements. We turn to the next slide. There is a second auditor's report that's included in the reporting package. And this is required by government auditing standards. It deals with internal control over financial reporting. And as we've mentioned, we do consider the library's controls to determine our audit procedures, but we are not expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of those controls. And then based on our considerations and our audit procedures, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be a material weakness. That doesn't mean that there may not be a material, however, material weaknesses could exist that we didn't identify. Remember, as an audit, we're applying judgment and materiality, so we do not look at every single transaction. What's not said here is material weakness is the worst type of finding an auditor can have. So we said we did not find any material weaknesses. We also did not report any significant deficiencies. Okay, that's the next level down. And then the lowest level of finding is what's called a regular control deficiency or a management letter comment. We had 1, and we'll talk about that at the very end of the presentation. Any questions? Next slide, Jeff. Before we get into the financial statements a little bit, does anyone have questions or concerns? Okay. So remember with the library, we actually have 2 sets of financial statements. We have the library-wide financial statements, which essentially are, if we were to try to compare ourselves to a for-profit entity or another entity that does not use fund accounting, we would use these financial statements to make that comparison. So if we look here, our statement of net position, this is essentially the equivalent of a balance sheet, and our total assets and deferred outflows, which is a type of asset, were just over $8 million as of June 30th, 2020. And the 2 most significant assets that we have are cash and our capital assets, or our fixed assets, net of depreciation. Next slide is the other half of the balance sheet, or the statement of net position. Shows our liabilities and deferred inflows, which is a type of liability. And as we can see, our total liabilities are just under $5 million. And the most significant components of that total are based on two different actuarial valuations. One is the net pension liability to ERS, which is just over $2 million. And the other is the estimated liability to fund our other post-employment benefits, which is just under $2.5 million. Next slide, and this is the last piece of the statement of net position, or balance sheet, if you will. We mentioned 2 slides previous that our total assets were about $8 million, that our total liabilities were just under $5 million. So our net position, or the residual value of the library, for lack of a better term, is just over $3 million, the difference between our assets and our liabilities. Next slide, again, library-wide. This shows our revenue and expenses. The top part is actually our expenses reduced by programmatic revenues. The middle section shows our general revenue items, real property taxes being the most significant piece. And for the year, we did have a negative change in net position of $438,000. We're going to look at this on the fund financial statements in a little bit, because I think from the library's perspective, you guys will use the fund financial statements more than you actually use the library-wide version. So if we turn to the next slide, we get into the balance sheet of the governmental funds, of which we have 2, our general fund and our capital projects fund. And here we can see we're very strong in our general fund. We have total assets of almost 3.5 million, comprised almost 100% of cash. We have liabilities of 174,000, leaving us with a fund balance of 3.3 million in the general fund. You can see our activity in the capital projects fund at year end consisted of just a grant receivable, which I believe was collected subsequently. Next slide. This is just in case anybody wants to take a look. We are required to show a reconciliation between the net position or fund balance in the governmental funds to the net position in the library in the library wide. So, why are those amounts different? And there are various items that are included or not included in the library-wide financial statements as compared to the governmental funds. And you can see that the most significant items are what we've talked about a little already. Capital assets recorded on the library-wide, not recorded in the funds. OPEB, same thing, recorded in the library-wide, but not recorded in the funds. And then the related activity with the deferred outflows and the deferred inflows related to those items, also not recorded in the funds. If we advance to the next slide, page 13, here's the fund income statement, which shows our revenue and expenses by fund. We'll concentrate just on the general fund for this purpose. As we see, we had revenue of 4.3 million. Again, real property taxes, to no surprise, is a significant component. We had just under 4 million in total expenditures. So from that basis, we actually had a profit in the general fund of 374,000. We'd mentioned earlier that we had a loss on the library-wide of in the $400,000 range. But in the fund financial statements, and we'll advance to the next page, we actually generated positive income for the year. And after we consider other sources and uses, which is essentially our operating transfers in the general fund, it's a positive 611,000. Overall, for the governmental funds, we have a positive 333,000. And then on the next slide, similar to how we do for the balance sheet, for the income statements, we do a reconciliation that compares the change in fund balance from the governmental funds, which were 333,000 to the good. How does that reconcile to the change in net position on the library activities as a whole, which were a negative 438,000? And we list those five or six items there, and the most significant being, again, related to depreciation, which is related to the capital assets, other post-employment benefits, and our pension expense. So the most of the change and most of the variation between the two sets of financial statements is due to the actuarial valuations for OPEB and pension, and then our capital assets. We advance to the next slide. We'll talk about just a couple of footnotes. We'll highlight one, our tax abatement footnote, note 9. So during our fiscal year 2020, we did have a pilot received of 205,000 and an amount of tax abated of just under 110. Advancing to the next slide is a new footnote this year. It's a contingency disclosure for COVID-19. So since our year is June 30th and the COVID hit with the pause in about mid-March, for us, COVID becomes a contingency because or an uncertainty. We're not sure what the ultimate outcome is going to be on the library operations. So, I know back when we did field work at that time, Jeff allowed us to come on site in order to do the audit. But I know at that time, I don't believe the library was allowing patrons to come inside the library. We had other mechanisms set up so they could use library facilities. I'm not sure if now, if anything has changed, if we are allowing patrons into the library, but COVID-19, it could, what is the impact into the future? Will it affect anything with real property taxes? Will it affect our access to grants and funding from federal, state, and local governments? So we just disclose that the pandemic is out there and that it continues to evolve at the date of the financial statements. And it's just a contingency, and you'll see a similar disclosure in just about every single entity's financial statement that has an audit during this time frame. Advancing to the next slide, we have this is the required supplementary information. So we have a schedule of revenues and expenses and changes in fund balance compared to budget. So if we look at the top half, which is the revenue side, we had actual revenues of 4.3 million. Our final amended budget was also 4.3 million. But when we compare the right down to the last dollar, we had a favorable variance in which our actual revenues of 4.372 were slightly higher by 26,000 than our final amended budget revenues. With expenditures, which appears in the middle of the page, our final amended budget was just under 4.5 million. Our actual expenditures were, including encumbrances, were just over 4 million, for an end result of a favorable variance in which our expenditures and encumbrances were less than our final amended budget by 348,000.
I guess I'm a little bit, I think I know the answer to this, but when I look in the second column and we talk about final amended budget as opposed to original budget. Is that encumbrances carried over from the previous fiscal year? Is that what that reflects?
Correct. So there, and you know, I can check back in the work papers, but I believe that that is, sometimes there are other components other than prior years encumbrances, but I believe for the library, that was the only item.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now, the next 2 pages, I won't spend a lot of time on. If we advance to page 19, the second schedule that's required supplementary information are the changes in our total OPEB liability. So again, this is something that's recorded just on the library-wide financial statements. So we can see we started the year out with at July 1st, 2019, the OPEB liability was 2.1 million. At the end of the year, at June 30th, 2020, it was just over 2.4 million, for an increase during the year of 273,000. And then we list in the first several lines the components of that change. And then advancing the page, again, our last piece of required supplementary information deals with our proportionate share of our net pension liability. And this is, again, as we've said, is based on an actuarial calculation that's audited by KPMG. And we rely on those reports for the information that is included in this schedule. And then the last item, if we advance the page.
Sorry, quick question.
Oop.
What is causing the huge swings from year to year in pension liability?
So that's a. So now you're looking. So you're looking probably at the percentages where in the proportionate share of the net pension liability.
I'm looking at
So
the
what again? There are a number of factors that, you know, again, this is based on an actuarial calculation. So whatever discount rate is being used by the actuary can impact the calculation. Similarly, you know, your covered payroll is fairly consistent, but there are, you know, and what I can do is after I can go back in and, you know, if we look in the actual financial statements, but I can send out an email that kind of describes what exactly goes into this actuarial calculation. And next year you could see that amount dropping significantly. So it's, you know, it's difficult. I know this isn't a good answer, but it's very difficult to really come up with a specific reason as to why, when we're dealing with an actuarial calculation, you know, what is the reason for the significant swing? Again, it could be market performance, it could be the discount rate, it could be the assumptions that they use, and those change from year to year to year.
Can I just say, I'm not sure, is my audio on? I guess. From the school district, that was the case. There were, I don't know exactly off the top of my head which indicators they were, but it was set or estimated from year to year based on a number of economic indicators.
And in the actual notes to the financial statements, if you look at the pension note, and it goes on for pages, and yes, I will warn you now, it is the cure for insomnia, but if you read through that, it really lists out all the actuarial assumptions, where the actuary determined the rates from, what resources they used in order to determine the calculation. This is really just a synopsis of that amount, but the amount that's there is reported to us on a letter from ERS that's then supported by the audit report of KPMG Pete Marlin.
Okay, yeah, I'd appreciate a follow-up on that item. Just the 2019 to 2020 delta for the proportionate share of net pension liability is significant, so.
And then lastly, on page 21, here is our loan management letter comment. And as I said, this is not a material weakness. It's not a significant deficiency. We did find when we were test calculating the accrual for compensated absences that it did not include FICA. And if in order to comply with GASB 16, that FICA calculation needs to be included in the accrual. And then additionally, the estimated liability that we were using was calculated based on total hours available and didn't consider the maximum amount that was allowable to be paid out per the contract. So these actually offset one another, I believe. And on the one hand, by not having the FICA in the liability, our liability was understated. By using the total hours as opposed to the max allowable, our liability was overstated. We did correct this, as we mentioned earlier. We did not pass on this adjustment. We did book this, so the financial statements and also the library's internal records are now correct. We are recommending going forward that when we do this calculation, that we consider both the FICA component and that we also make sure that the hours that we're using are limited to the maximum amount that's listed in the eligible participants contract. And that was it. That's all I had. Can I answer any questions or any other concerns that you might have?
I had a question, and I'm not going to leave. I had kind of highlighted a few pieces of the actual report, but I don't want to leave in order to find that, because the last time I tried that, I got kicked out of the meeting. There was a piece about the debt service on the building. Because the building's owned by the school district, I believe. And it said something about the debt insurance debt service is zero now. Is that correct? Is this ringing a bell for you?
It is. So I was actually going to try to pull up the report. Bear with me.
Oh, yeah, maybe I can find my copy now.
Charmaine, was it a footnote or a chart that do you think?
It was it was a footnote to some text on a page. And I might, now that the PowerPoint's off, I might be able to find my copy of it. I'm going to click on something and hopefully I won't disappear.
So I think, yeah, so where I think you were looking, if we're looking at the actual report, if you're looking at it in a PDF, it's page 24 of the PDF, or page 22 of the actual report. Okay. And that's where we have a schedule that takes our capital assets from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And there's a paragraph there that reads, the building occupied by the library is owned by Bethlehem Central School District because the library was obligated to make payments on the debt issuance to the building.
That's it.
Okay. And as of June 30th, all previous debt obligations related to the library have been fulfilled. So that is correct. Okay. So that does bring up, something that maybe you've thought about in the past or something to consider for the future. So we actually have an asset here that's recorded on two entities' books, right? So the building's on our books, the library, and it's also on the school district books. So I know I have one other library client, and I know a few of my partners have library clients that do not have the building recorded on their books. They disclose that it's recorded on the school district's books because I believe the school district actually has the legal title to the building. So the question is, I think, the reason why this disclosure is in here is so that nobody comes back at us and says, hey, you've got a building on your books that you don't have title to. We're telling them we know that in the notes to the financial statements. If that was something going down the road, say next year, the year after, you thought, well, maybe this is the time, maybe we should take the building off the library's books, we can do that. But essentially what that is would be a prior period adjustment, because you're actually adjusting the opening net position or of the library. It wouldn't be affecting the current period. We'd actually be restating your opening net position amounts. So I think that's probably why the library has not elected to do that, because that prior period adjustment, it looks a little out of the ordinary. Not that this would be an easy one to do, but it's just a difference from the norm or a difference from the standard report. So just something to think about. Are you comfortable with the way it is, or do you want to make that adjustment in the future?
And Tom, just
Think about it. I have to say, I don't see any advantage to the library to pursuing that. I think the way we exist, and it is very unique, I understand that, but the library through our revenue has paid for the building, albeit with debt service, but the debt service is paid off. So I would not see a reason to separate it, to eliminate it.
Yeah, and as long as, and if that's the consensus of the board, I personally don't have an issue with that. I'm just just letting you know there are libraries that handle it different, and there are libraries that are doing the exact same thing that you're doing, because almost all libraries are in the same position as Bethlehem with this. So depending upon who it is, some people have done exactly what you do and make the disclosure, and others have taken it off. And Mary, I tend to agree with you. I mean, we go through the exercise. Does the library get any benefit from doing that? Probably not. It's kind of an exercise in pushing numbers around. So, I have no problem if you stay as is with no change.
Yeah, I mean, I raised it not for the board to discuss, make a decision. I just wanted to make sure it's something that stuck out for me, and I wanted to ask about. I also had a question about fund balance and the retirement system, but I don't know if folks want to talk more about the building or that aspect, or if other folks have other questions. No? So this may be a naive question, but so there's money added to the fund balance at the end of this budget cycle, and can fund balance amounts ever be added to retirement, the ERS funds?
No. So where specifically, Charmaine, are you looking here?
There's a 333,000. I don't have the page number. So it's more of a general question. So any fund balance and amount. So let's say there's unrestricted fund balance.
So you're back in the statements,
I suppose. But it's more of a general question. So even without the numbers, if there is money in a unrestricted fund balance, the general question is, can that be applied to, and I saw some people shaking their heads no, into employee retirement or health insurance for employees? It sounds like it is not.
It is a no, and
okay.
Yeah, and you're not essentially the liability winds up getting recorded in the library-wide financial statements, and not in the governmental funds.
Mm-hmm.
And the law basically says you're not allowed to fund it.
Okay, got it. That was my general question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that's why a lot of libraries and school districts are the same way. They understand the library-wide or the district-wide financial statements, but they're really paying attention to the governmental, the fund financial statements, because the fund financial statements aren't muddied, if you will, by the capital assets and the OPEB and the pension.
Got it. Thank you.
And I guess since this is a public meeting and anyone in the public may be hearing this question and not fully understand some of the things that we do, I think it's important to mention at this point that although we call that an unrestricted fund balance, a material portion of that is used on an annual basis to cover our operations from June 30th until September, when we start seeing tax revenue. So it's not like it's completely it's not completely free to be used for anything. There are purposes for that. So it's just a clarification.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
Hey, can I, and I apologize, I didn't see who asked the question about the pension liability and the swings.
It's Harmeet.
Hamid did, I think.
There is, I don't know if you can share, so in the actual draft of the financial statements, and here's where I want to, and maybe I can show you, I didn't know if you had this to look at it. So on page 28 of the PDF, which is page 26 of the financial statements, is where with the pension, we're in the middle of the pension note down towards the bottom of the page. And it talks about the discount rate. And then the very last paragraph, it talks about the sensitivity of the proportionate share of the net pension liability or asset to the discount rate assumption. So the discount rate that was used by the actuary to calculate our proportionate share was 6.8%. And that calculated out to a proportionate share liability of just under $2.1 million. What this schedule shows is what happens if we increased that discount rate by 1% up to 7.8. The liability drops to $478,000, all the way down from 2.1 million. What happens if we go the other way? What happens if we decrease the discount rate by 1% from 6.8 to 5.8? Well, now that net pension liability goes from 2.1 million, it increases to almost 3.8 million. So that shows, right there, how just a simple, small change in the discount rate assumption can significantly impact the value that's disclosed and recorded. So back in that schedule that we were looking at in the synopsis, I think the liability went from 536,000 at the end of 2019 all the way up to this almost 2.1 million in 2020, and it's 100% explained just by the discount rate that's being used by the actuary.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions, concerns?
I have a question based on what Mary said, and I might just need time to kind of process this, but if you use the fund balance to cover the library expenses from June until September when tax revenue is coming through, is that because of the budgetary, the calendar of the budgetary cycle? That's what I assumed it was.
Yes. So
That's correct. Okay.
The budget starts on July 1, and then the tax money is received in September through October.
Got it.
And then,
Got it. That's what I thought. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Bet.
Anyone else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, Mark. Well, before I go, I just want to say thank you very much to Jeff and to Tanya. This is our second year as your audit firm. I mean, the audit went very, very well this year. Especially second year through. Didn't have to worry about predecessor auditors and familiarizing ourselves with the operations. I appreciated Jeff allowing us to come on site. I want to thank you for all the effort. And let's face it, an audit is just a a disruption to the normal functionings of the library. I mean, typically, we ask a lot of questions. We ask for a lot of documentation. Tanya doesn't get much else done, during that field work time, and she actually has her own work to do, and she finds time for us. So I appreciate that. I think she does a very good job. As we said, we had the one little finding, and this is a clean audit. And even in this COVID environment, you guys are done right on time, just like you normally would expect to be. I have other clients that the COVID just set them back, and we're getting into them late. So congratulations on a job well done. Again, I thank everyone for your participation tonight. And if there's any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So I'll wait to hear if Tanya or Jeff, if you shoot me an email, give me a call, let me know if it's been approved, and then I'll get the representation letter out for you guys to sign, and we'll get the wrap-up process, and we'll get everything done and taken care of and delivered.
Okay, we'll get in touch probably this week.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay,
Thank you,
take
Tom.
care.
So we probably want to talk about whether we want to accept this audit next. So does anyone have any further questions, concerns, or anything related to the documents?
I may have some questions, not questions, just some things that I want to discuss with Sherry later at some point, just for my own understanding. But I think that the statements are fine for us to go ahead and approve the way they are.
Okay. Okay, so I want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second? Okay, great. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. So great. Thank you for that. So you want to go into the previous minutes on page 2 through 7. People can take a couple of minutes and take a quick look at those. When you're ready, I'll take a motion on those as well.
Have a question and for Kristen, and I'm sorry, on the Upper Hudson Library report, what is it that Lisa said?
Oh, hold on. Let me pull that up. It was just a weird grammar thing. And sorry, hold on. So what she said is their board split some of the additional construction grant money from the other systems that didn't use them. So maybe that's the phrase that needs to be there. It was the money that wasn't used.
From the other libraries.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they split it among the other libraries that didn't receive full funding. So I can add that line in there that just says that it wasn't used.
Yeah. All right, great, thanks.
Okay, anyone have any, can I get a motion on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the previous minutes.
Okay, great. A second?
I'll second it.
Right, any discussion, questions, concerns? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Any opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Okay, so we'll go into the financial report on pages 8 to 14. Sherry, are you doing that?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
So I'd just like to mention that we made a few minor changes to the reports to try to clarify things a little bit and simplify. The most notable change is that we added some percentages so that you can see more quickly and easily kind of where we stand at any point in time. If you look at the revenue and expense report, you can see that total expenses as of October 31st were about 27%. So we are under budget as of this point in time. Of course, you know, we're only about 1/3 of the way through the fiscal year. We're under, you know, in salaries and benefits as well as in other expenses, pretty consistently. And we haven't used the capital expenditures budget yet at all. The other thing I wanted to mention, we talked a little bit last month about the tax revenue and where we were as of that point in time and how it compared to prior years. We talked with the school district, and what we learned is that, well, we're right where we are. It's very normal. We're at 94%, and that's very consistent with prior years. Last year was a bit of an anomaly because they actually sent us, the check that they cut us in October was more than the actual tax revenue that they had received as of that point in time. So it stood out a little bit. It looked different than it had looked in prior years, but we're very consistent with where we need to be, where we should be.
Did they talk about any tax slippage yet? Everything going on?
I don't believe so. Tanya, did you?
No, I spoke to Martha in the business office. She's the accountant there. And
Okay.
she said they have not seen any major differences compared to previous years. They haven't heard any grumblings, you know, any issues that taxpayers are having. So she's pretty confident that we're right on track to receive what we've normally received in previous years.
Great, thanks.
I think we may have had a discussion last month. I think it was during the board meeting about the state making us whole for our taxes if we don't get them. And we were going to look for some clarification on that. Is that still a pending item?
I didn't think we had clarification. I thought we clarified it. Am I wrong? It's essentially, if the school district doesn't get their money, the state makes them whole, and then they make us whole. From the state makes up the difference in what taxpayers don't pay.
Right. In our conversation with the state or with the school district, they were not concerned that money would be subject to some sort of state holdback, that they would be receiving their full taxes from the county.
Okay. Okay.
How many more years of pilot do we have?
So there's a lot of different there's a lot of different pilots that are out there. The big one is the PSEG pilot. That is the bulk of the money that we get of that $200,000. Much of that 190 something is from that one pilot. So at some point at the end of 2024, I'll look at my chart to confirm that that's going to be ending at some point. And then the question is, will that entity be granted another pilot agreement, or will it go onto the tax rolls? And I have no inside information on that at all.
Does it have to be one or the other? I mean, they can't just walk away and say we're not paying taxes.
Right.
Correct. I mean, it would become, if for most of the pilot, the small ones like CEFCU or a lot of the small businesses that are in the tech park, they are granted a pilot agreement. At the end, they're just on the tax rolls. That's the expectation. You know, there's a kind of a V-shaped agreement in the middle of the pilot agreement. They're paying the least amount of pilot money, and then it sort of ramps up as the agreement comes to an end, where the amount of money they're paying for the pilot would essentially be very close to the amount of money they would be paying in taxes to sort of soften the blow for that. But if there's a third option, I guess it would be just wrap up and close the entity. So.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any questions on anything else you want to tell us, Sherry, or are we good?
No, that was what I had.
Okay, great. Any questions for Sherry?
I have a quick question, and it's a general question about the treasurer's report. At one point, the board had requested that the treasurer prepare a summary to be included in the board package, just an executive summary. Okay. I'm not sure whether we're still looking for that or not. I just thought we'd have a quick discussion tonight and say, do we want Sherry to prepare a brief summary? Are we good the way this is going now? How would the board like us to proceed, or like Sherry to proceed?
What do people think on that?
Summary, if it's possible.
Summary if possible? Yeah.
I'll go with the will of the other board members. I'm fine with what we have been getting, but if it's helpful to other people, that's fine with me also.
I personally think a brief summary is helpful. I think 9 times out of 10, it's going to be very brief, 1 or 2 sentences, but if there is something that Sherry wants to make sure we note before the board meeting, I think the executive summary would be the place that we would definitely get tipped off, even if you don't have a chance to go through the whole package, there'd be a statement in there saying, this is coming up, be careful, we are going to be discussing something. So I think a quick summary is helpful, but I don't,
I'm happy to do that. That won't be a problem at all. And I can just attach it. It can just be the front page of the report and just be a part of the whole packet.
Yeah, like a paragraph or less, I would say.
Yeah. Right.
The top lines. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Any other board members have thoughts on that?
That's good.
Okay, great.
Thanks. And I like the formatting changes too. I do find them very helpful.
Good, thank you.
Okay, I need a motion on the financial report then.
I make a motion to accept the financial report as included in the board package.
Great, thanks. Any second? Michelle, second. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Yes. Any opposition? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Personnel report.
All righty. Scroll down to the right. Sorry about this. This personnel report is getting massive, so I apologize for that. There's a lot of things going on. You will see on this report that I'm requesting to fill. There's a backfill of a library clerk position, which is relatively non-controversial. It's just a backfill of an existing position at the same number of hours. And then I'm asking for the ability to fill 2 temporary part-time librarians that would be in the place of the full-time librarian that's up top. This comes out of, and I'll launch into this. This comes out of the discussion we're having that we need some additional staffing on the weekends, and those full-time positions are not the best to fill exactly that. I don't want to make a permanent change, so I'm asking to fill these temporarily. I think this is a COVID related issue with the number of service points that I've got. And where we need the staff people in order to provide the services that we need to provide to the public. So in the future, I would seek to end these positions and go back forward and fill the full-time librarian position that would work into the regular rotation on the weekends, just like all of the other librarians. But for now, I need some additional staff people specifically there, and other civil service titles can't work up into a librarian title. So the librarians can work into the clerical titles, but the clerical staff cannot work into the librarian titles. It's just civil service rules. So that's why I'm requesting to fill those 2 temporary positions. It would be for no more than a year.
Okay, so these would be positions that work exclusively on the weekend, primarily on the weekend. What are we looking at?
Every Saturday and Sunday. So all the weekend hours, plus then a couple other shifts during the week that could help fill in on some evening hours to try to make them attractive, because the just Saturday and Sunday isn't a particularly easy job for me to fill.
Okay, I guess that's part of my question, because from a logistics standpoint, I'm like, great, if we can get people that will work the weekends and that's their regular thing.
Yep.
But the longer term thing is it's problematic, and then if they have to be off or whatever, it's harder to fill it. So you guys still think that rotating with the people that work during the week, that's the better long-term option?
There are some contractual issues with having a full-time staff person to work on the weekends. The way the contract is written, there's some language in there that would make that problematic. That was what we assessed last month as we were looking at the best way to address the staffing issues. And because we have that open position, we thought it best, given the contract and the thorny nature that we would have in negotiating that, we thought it best to go with the solution that we have, which is to move forward with a couple temporary positions. It may well be that this ends up being the best thing ever, and then I would come back to you and say, this is what we've been doing for the past year. This is working out well for us.
Okay,
And
so
then
we're
may
gonna
request it.
kind of keep an open mind about it. Okay.
Absolutely. We haven't, even our part-time people, we have traditionally had them work a rotation of those weekends so that they can, to make the positions just so we can fill them. The number of people that want to work every Saturday and Sunday and only Saturday and Sunday is a limited pool of people. We think right now we have some interest in some of those types of positions for various larger economic and societal reasons. And I think that's where we have our need. So we thought we'd strike while we had the opportunity.
Okay.
Jeff, can you remind me what the current browsing hours of the library are on Saturday and Sunday right now?
Okay, so there's no Sunday hours at all.
That's what I thought.
Correct. And Saturday hours, but that's what we're trying to address, right?
Okay.
So and then Saturday is 1 to 5, and the goal is to have us open at 10, which would be our normal 10 to 5 would be under our normal Saturday hours. We're trying to get back to that, and have enough people in the building to be able to be at the service points that we need to have for the whole hours that we're open.
If the hours were to be cut back because of rising numbers, and I know it's something you can predict,
Yep.
would you still need those positions?
They're temporary. I mean, I think by the nature of them, no. That's it's hard to say, but the whole point, the nature of the position, we're not locked into a certain number of hours. It's a temporary
Okay.
position. We're saying it's at the needs of the library, and it's not a forever position for the individual or for us.
So it's like is it up to 19 hours? Or
It's up to 19 hours. So that's the Saturday and the Sunday, those full 5 hours on Sunday and 7 hours on Saturday, plus a few other
the other shifts.
little shifts to try, and that if someone came in to us and said, I'm only interested in Saturday, Sunday, I don't really want any other hours, great, then that's what we would go with. That's why it's kind of vaguely worded. It would never be more than 19 hours a week. That's our upper limit.
Okay.
And would you put a time frame in the contract? I'm just trying to get my computer back up.
Absolutely. So civil service absolutely limits a very hard out of no more than a year on that time frame, and that depends on how we hire somebody in civil service. So,
but could you indicate that it could be not up to a year is one thing, but can you say, how flexible can you be? I guess I'm kind of hedging. Let's say the libraries are closed.
Sure. There's no contract. There is no contract.
Okay, that's what I was basically getting at. So you could basically have let someone go should that be the case.
Correct.
Without. Okay, got it.
Correct.
Thank
Everybody with eyes open on a temporary position like this.
Got it.
That's
Thank
not
you.
there's no expectation that then continues if the library's closed. They're literally to be there to staff the desks.
Got it. Thank you.
I think this is a good solution to create the flexibility that you need in this with other uncertainty, right? I think it's a good idea. Great.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Are we ready for a motion?
Yeah, I think so. So go ahead.
I make a motion to accept the personnel report as presented on page 15 in the board packet.
Second it.
Okay, great. Any other discussion, questions? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand signify by raising your hand. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Okay, so Jeff, director's report.
Okay, so we'll be talking about the Bobcat, and we'll be talking about the boiler in a little bit. So I'll just defer those, but they're noted in my report.
Yep.
I did just general statistics. We'll have Catherine pop on at the end of my report. She has some statistics about the impact of fine free and what that is doing. The board had asked that, what did our sort of natural experiment do? And I'm going to let Catherine present on that. She's much more cogent on that point than I am. We'll do that at the end of my report.
Okay.
Just briefly wanted to note that it was the end of the pop-up library, a very popular service, but the weather, even though it's been super nice the last couple of days, darkness kind of naturally limits that, the pop-up library. So we're inside, we're open for many of the hours during the week, and we are open on those limited Saturday hours with the expectation. The goal is to be open on more hours as soon as we can get ourselves straightened out from a staffing position. Book bundles continue to be popular, though a little less popular than they have been in the past. I have some attendance numbers in there just so you can browse those. Did talk about the successful Friends of the Library book sale. I think that was great and very popular and very well received by the public. It may well be a model for the way they can run book sales in the future. And then you had some questions about programs. That's all listed in there. We did have some comments a little bit about recording some of our programs. People felt if the discussion was an important part of the programming, the members of the public felt that discussion was dampened a little bit by the recording of the program. So just we're monitoring that, and we're seeing what we would how we would edit things to make that presentable. But we are trying to record programs where maybe would be focused in the future. If it's more of like a lecture type program, we would record that and make that available for future watching. And then if it was more of a roundtable or discussion program, maybe less likely record that. We don't want people to feel that they not be comfortable speaking if they attend that sort of a program. Lots of outreach with the school districts. I'm very happy to see that both our successful attempts to reach out to the school districts, but also attempts via school district staffs to reach staff members to reach out to us, and having some good collaboration there. It's all virtual collaboration, and I'm pleased with the staff. They're working really hard to strengthen those connections. And of very little import, but I am changing the statistical report a little bit to reflect sort of our modern reality of the way e-content is used across multiple platforms, because we have so many different vendors now that really offer the same services. We can't say, this is Overdrive and this is Hoopla. It's ebooks and it's e-audiobooks and it's e-video, downloadable video and magazines. We're just going to be listing them sort of, we don't list out our circulation by publisher, right? So we're going to be doing that going forward as well. And then I am pleased that Mark had asked me, he had seen some of the developing leader program from NYLA, and Mark said, is anybody participating in that? And I'm pleased to report that Frank Summers is going to be participating in that in the coming year. Kathy Brenner was a former participant, has been asked to come back as a mentor for that program as well. So I was pleased on both of those things. Lots of our librarians are participating in the collaborative summer reading program, which is excellent. That is really the steering committee that helps shape what summer reading program looks like for libraries across the country. And so being involved in that early and in several different places is important for us. And then I have at the NYLA conference just wrapped up last week. And at that conference, I was appointed as the chair of they changed the Civil Service Task Force into a Civil Service Committee. And I've been named the chair of that committee for the coming year. So that's fun. And I want to bring up a histogram now. Some of the data that was in the board packet has been updated a little bit, and I want to have Catherine on. I'm going to share out that updated. We'll fix that officially in the packet when the time comes. But Catherine, if you want to jump on.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. So we thought we would take this time to really look at the experiment that we, by happenstance, get to run to figure out how fines really affect the return of materials. So in the board packet, you have 3 charts that lead into showing you this particular chart that you're seeing on the screen right now. So what I did is I asked for an extract from the database of our circulation patterns from July 1st to October 15th for items that were returned to Bethlehem, and then when they were checked out and when they were returned. So I was able to create a histogram, so a frequency distribution of how many items are returned in the relationship to the due date. So the chart you see in front of you, the due date is 0 days. It's when items are returned exactly when they're supposed to be returned. Anything to the left of that 0 due date is items that are returned early. Anything to the right are items that are returned late. This particular chart is a density diagram. So it takes a chart that says in 2018, we had 99,000 items that were returned in that time period. And we chose that time period because that's when we were taking things and fine free, without fines for the year 2020. So we wanted to get 2 baseline graphs from 2018 and 2019. So this chart takes that frequency distribution and puts it in something where we can overlay the patterns on top of each other. So you'll note that the majority of items that are returned before their due date. In 2018, it was 90% of things that were returned before their due date. In 2019, it was 89.9%. And with fine free and a pandemic, 71% of items were returned on time. So I thought that was really incredible. And returned, that means that 29% of items were returned 1 day or longer late. So for this chart, we can see that the average return date is still a couple of days before an item is due. And there's only a small, that blue area underneath the chart you see is that effect of a pandemic and materials not having fines charged on them when they're returned. So I thought this was fantastic. I was really pleased with the patterns that we are seeing, that what we saw in 2018 and 2019 was the same. And what we're seeing in 2020 is pretty similar, that the impetus to get something back to the library is the due date, much more so than the fines.
Catherine, you mentioned the 2018, 2019 data is about 90% are
Yes.
returned by the due date.
Yep.
If we were looking for a 90% return rate on the 2020 data, it wouldn't be 90% by day 0. It'd be 90% by day negative something.
So it would be
What would
day
you
4. Day 4 because of the quarantine. So the chart that's in the board packet, if you look at it, you actually get a bump at day 4. If Jeff can go up down.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, you'll see it. So this chart is, it's the raw data. I'm not factoring for the quarantine. So you can see at about 4 days after 0, most things are returned. The next chart factors in, I subtracted 4 days from every item that was returned. And it's perfect. It matches, that pattern is is very, very similar. The high point is at 0 days, and that's what I wanted to see.
Well, I see. Okay, so the 4-day bump there is strictly the result of the quarantine. The items are actually being returned on day 0.
Yeah.
We're just not logging them in until the post-quarantine period. Okay.
Yeah, they're checked in 4 days later. Yeah.
Right.
So that bump was weird, and it showed up in your board packet as weird, and it didn't match the histogram that's in your board packet for 2020 data. There's not a bump at day 4. The bump really is at 0. So I was thrilled. There's no real action. I just thought that it could really allow us to use this, great experiment and see how people's behaviors are changing.
So the takeaway really is behaviors aren't changing, right? I mean,
Right. They're a small percentage changing, and I mean, we're still in a pandemic. That's the part, that's the part that I'm not factoring in for. We're only looking at when things are returned. So, yeah, to me, it's not really the fines that are encouraging people to behave the way they are. It's being assigned a date at checkout.
Yeah.
Now, see, I'm wondering because what I'm looking at this graph too, and it looks to me that the only change where there's been an increase in late returns is in 2020.
Yes.
But you're saying that that's a small percentage because it is the light blue,
Yeah.
right, of 0 days. So that's the only.
Yeah, there is an effect. Yeah, there are definitely people, that light blue underneath the graph, if you make in that positive quadrant, is 29% of returns. But the mean, our average return is still long before it's due, and the spike of returns is the day it's due. So there's absolutely an effect, but it's definitely less than, I feel like it's less than, 5 days, 3 days. It's not that much on items that are overdue. The mean is still far before the due date.
Right, you can see that the most are returned before the 0 days, but it looks like it goes all the way, 30 days really before it really starts to go down to be equal to prior years.
Yeah, things are coming in a little later. It'd be a lie to say they're not, but it's a much lower amount than I was anticipating. And not only are we fine free at the moment, but people don't want to leave their houses as much. So there's a lot of, this is the worst case scenario, and this is a fantastic scenario.
Are we including electronic borrowings in this chart? Or
No, ebooks are never late.
Right.
That's my point. That's my point. So it's not being skewed by ebooks. Okay, so this is things where people physically have to bring them back.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Well, thank you, Catherine, for putting all those together. I think that's really useful information.
Yeah.
I totally needed this to explain to me because I looked at this and I was like, no way am I going to figure out what this means. They're going to have to explain this one to me.
Well, I didn't write anything. I thought it would be easier just to
It wouldn't have
walk
mattered.
everybody.
I think it just the difference was less than I was expecting. When Catherine came and talked about the data with me, I was expecting the difference in those return due dates to be bigger than it was. So we'll get the chart corrected in the board packet to make sure that you have the most accurate version of this. But I wanted to share out with you the Catherine's most accurate chart. So thanks for Catherine. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yep.
It's interesting to consider. I do know that fines generate revenue for the library.
They do.
Off the top of my head, I'm thinking it's 30,000. I'm not exactly sure.
Ish. Yep.
Ish. I can't remember that number. And yet, Jeff, you said some libraries are fine free. Is that correct?
Lots of libraries. So the large libraries in our area, Albany Public Libraries, are our closest neighbor, who is a large size library that's fine free, is Albany Public Library. And you can argue, well, anyway, they're not an exact exactly analogous to our library, but that's I think it helps us to have some data. We were trying to project data from other libraries. We're saying, well, this library is similar to us, and this is their experiment. This is a library that's similar to us in another state, and this is their experience with going fine free. This is our own people and our own data and our own circulation. We've run a natural experiment. We can see a little bit about what the effect is, and I think that would help us have an honest discussion, because before we were talking about theory, and now we have several months of good data about how people behave in a fine-free scenario. So I think that helps us have that discussion, and and then we can talk about the revenue that the fines generate. We can talk about the difference in the return dates, that small percentage difference. We can talk about that, and then we can talk about how much staff time is used in collecting those fines and all of that. But it helps us to have more information, and that's what Catherine's done. So thank you.
Great.
All right. Back to my director's report. you. And then we'll just go down in the circulation report, which is on page 24. You can see our circulation continues to be down about 27% compared, and that is inclusive of electronic circulation and physical circulation. So that's both of those two things added together. That number is down about 27.6%, so just under 30%. Again, I'm still pretty pleased with that number considering all of the challenges that we've got. The interlibrary loan process is we're bringing in more books than last year at the same time. So actually the hold shelves are more active than they were, which makes sense, right? More people are requesting those books and having those, that we'll call that the curbside effect. So that is more active than the same month last year. And then down below, you'll see the ebook, e-audiobook, e-magazine, and streaming video use. And that will allow us to keep tabs on that going forward. If we change platforms, if we change services, we'll be able to make sure we're comparing apples to apples and keep those circulation numbers for posterity. So that's that. That's my director's report. If anyone have any questions.
What's the equipment line? Is that the, you have a negative 77%. Is that the Chromebook?
That's like library of things, the library of things stuff.
So that's got to
Yeah.
be done just because.
It is. Well, and some of it we've taken out. So anything that touches, like the
Right.
goggles or anything that touches someone's face, that's out.
Okay.
But we've made many of those things requestable for Bethlehem patrons. So they're starting to see a little bit more. I'm expecting we'll see the remaining library of things items going out a little bit more as we go forward.
Okay.
Have we gotten the new computers yet? The new laptops?
The new laptops for the staff?
Yeah.
No. They'll the expectation is January.
Oh, okay.
So it's everything like that has just been delayed. I mean, we would have expected a sort of three-week lead time in the pre-COVID, maybe 4 weeks, and now it's you'll get them when you get them. So
Exactly. When they're available, when we make them. Yeah.
Yep. I think it's shipping too. A lot of those things come up from overseas, and
Yep.
I think those logistical chains are interrupted.
Okay, great. Any questions for Jeff on his report? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the UHLS report.
Do you need to accept that, the director report, or no?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Don't have a lot to report. We are meeting on Wednesday and discussing a lot of budgetary issues. We have Central Library Development Aid that Services Committee needs to review, and some of the concerns regarding impact on some, state budget cuts in terms of on UHLS. So a lot of financial discussions.
Yeah, it's just a reality that the state budget cuts when they come through hit the Upper Hudson as an organization much harder than they hit our library or libraries, local libraries in particular. Our total state funds last year were about $25,000. So if we get 80% of that by the end of the year, it's not that big an amount of money, but for Upper Hudson, it's a big part of their budget. So.
Yeah, and I think some of the smaller libraries, it's a bigger hit. So they're hurting.
Okay, great. Any questions on that?
Hey, real quick, Lisa, sorry, if I'd known you were here in cyberspace earlier, you weren't showing up on my screen. I would have asked you directly the question rather than Kristen. But apparently, yeah.
Okay, new business, the retirement annual invoice.
All right. So Harmeet's favorite subject, the New York State and local retirement system. So every year they give us an invoice. It is way over my authorization limit. So I need you to authorize me to pay this bill.
What was last year's bill? How much was last year's?
$283.
Thank you. Whew. Thanks, Tanya.
I make a motion to give Jeff or to approve the payment of the annual retirement invoice.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion, questions? Okay, please raise your hand if you are approve the motion. Any opposition? Abstention. Okay, motion carries. Thanks. Bobcat.
I just
Okay.
have one clarifying question. So
Sure.
the huge swing we saw in the pension contribution numbers,
Yeah.
how are we budgeting for that?
So there's not a huge swing in the contribution numbers. The numbers are fairly stable. They have in the past gone up. If the economy really tanks, that number does go up. But and I hope I'm answering the question that you're asking. It's the actuarially determined amount that the library's on the hook for. You know, how well funded is the New York State retirement system? You hear them putting that number out all the time, and this is a negotiation, I'm sure, between that multi-billion-dollar organization and KPMG as they, you know, the tiny changes in their financial suppositions can make that number swing around wildly. It's not a number that comes home to roost unless the library ceased to exist, right? There's some if they say the pension is 90% funded, then eventually everybody that's employed and everybody who ever has been employed, there's a certain amount of money that would have to go to their retirement if they lived for X number of years, right? So that's the amount of money that would be determined that we owe in the very long term. That's that $2 million. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. It's a sort of a long-term net exposure number, not an annual
Correct.
budgetary number. Okay.
And that's why the two numbers that you'll see that are very similar is that long-term exposure and then the one for the retiree health insurance, right? So that's that other number that there's some obligation to, you know, provide that retiree health insurance for people. What would be the ongoing, what would be today's cost of that ongoing expense going forward? And Sherry, you can hit me with anything at any time if I'm explaining this incorrectly, but you know, it's just, we handle it, we pay it budgetarily every year, the little amount, we just pay it every year, but there is a long-term liability there. And that's what they have to include. That was some of those GASB regulations were that those expenses, those obligations be booked and recognized rather than, it's not a budgetary expense, it's a long-term expense. So.
Right, exactly. There was a lot of discussion about it actually when it came out that it should really be a footnote. A lot of people felt it should be a footnote to the financial statements rather than something you actually have to book. But the people who wanted it booked won out in the end.
Yeah.
And it complicates things. It makes it very complicated.
Yeah, and my first reaction was I heard that same question. My first reaction is to say, you know, can the library create a reserve account to fund that so that we can, you know, be even? And the answer is no, it's illegal. You can't do that. So it just exists as this long-term obligation.
I mean, really, for our purposes, it's really a long-term obligation of the taxpayers of this community.
Correct.
The
Right.
taxpayers of them. So that's another reason that brings home why you can't do it now, because could it be the future taxpayers as opposed to people funding it now? So that's the way I think of it.
I learn stuff every time. Thanks, Mary. That's good. Every time Sherry says, that's right, I feel like I got an A. So thank you. All right. Bobcat, was that what we were talking about? Bobcat? Okay. So you guys have heard me talking about this for a couple months. We've been trying to identify something that would help us if we're still using the sheds over the course of the winter, which we expect to be doing, still quarantining items, then moving around large laundry carts full of books. This thing helps us with that. It is not the only purpose to have this. When I asked Kevin to sort of start thinking about how we could be moving those carts around safely in the parking lot, and what then would be the uses of this, he came up with a long list of landscaping projects that it would be incredibly helpful with them, right down to just the other week where they're dragging around enormous tarps full of leaves, which don't seem very heavy, but when they're an enormous tarp full, they're actually heavier than you think they are. So they were dragging those around with a lawnmower, which is probably not ideal. This little doohickey can work for that as well. So the biggest direct thing that I see is that we get a lot of deliveries that come in on pallets. then we can't move those into the library because we don't have a forklift. We don't have, we're breaking those out in the parking lot. We break them down. The delivery kicks them off the back of the truck. We break them down and we hand haul them inside. And depending on how heavy those are, like a pallet of salt, it's doable, but it's work. In addition, there's a lot of landscaping projects that this would make much easier. So it's a piece of equipment. It is a capital investment, and we looked at 3 different brands of these. This one was the least expensive and the smallest, and we're not looking for a very big or large piece of equipment, but we do have need for something with a bucket and something with a forklift to be able to move objects and things around the property. And this seemed to be the most economical choice from that. In addition, the ability for us to have a local vendor who is in Selkirk, who can rent us the additional attachments for this. So if we were digging a channel in the ground in the yard, or an auger attachment for the whole, we can rent those things, and it's super local. So this in the end tipped it over, in addition to being $15,000 less expensive than some of the other options. So
You pretty much answered the big question that I had, was what do we use this for? The only other question that I have, just to put it in perspective, does the school district own some sort of piece of equipment like this? Not that I'm talking about sharing, but I'm just saying, they're a larger entity than us. I would assume that they have equipment that does this too.
Bigger, yes, they would have.
Okay.
This
So
is
this is reasonable that we're buying a smaller model of it. We
Yeah.
definitely have enough uses for it. Yeah.
And we have the funds in the budget to cover it.
we do.
Right. Okay, any questions on it for Jeff on this?
Where would you store it? Do you have room to store it inside someplace?
Going to be in the garage. Yep.
Okay, I'll accept the motion on this.
Make a
I make
motion.
a motion that we move forward to purchase the Bobcat as with the estimate I received. I guess it's on pages
28.
28 and 29.
Okay, great. Second, awesome.
Second.
Great, Carolyn. Any other discussion, questions? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you.
Any opposed, abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Bobcat approved.
All right.
Do you have a sense of how long do you have to wait for it, or is it in stock? Or?
It's not in stock. When we're ordering on state contract, they actually make this thing and ship it to us. But the company that we're going with says if we have need of it right now, they can rent us one or the slightly larger model right now. We were developing a relationship with that company. So we had need of it in immediate need, this could happen until ours is made available to us. So
Okay,
That's great.
and one other quick, can you do snow removal with it? Does it do?
snow? Yes. So we actually were talking, it was one of the things I did. So if we were shaving down the snowbanks or something with it to try to, we have a contractor who comes in when they're doing massive snow removal, like big amounts, but for smaller amounts, absolutely. The bucket, it can go in, scoop those up and move them around. So just, anyway, it's a walk behind. It's kind of like it's like a lawnmower, but beefier. That's kind of what it's like, but it just has a lot of different attachments. I don't want people to think that this is a piece of equipment like a backhoe or something that we're inside. It's something that we walk around behind it. So.
Great. Okay, boiler.
Boiler. Okay. So what I have is the first proposal from Train. I wanted to include it in here just so we could set our conversation. And remember that during the HVAC project, it was proposed that when we originally thought the project was going to be underspent, we were looking at the folks from DASNY were trying to say, your boiler's old. It should be replaced at some point in the future. We were trying to work it in under that project. And they were recommending at the time, they're like, hey, you could just have it be a hot water heater too. You're running a boiler, you just attach the hot water. So what I asked Train was basically what was discussed at that point was a replacement of the boiler and then the option to add that hot water tank onto the side so we could eliminate the domestic hot water heater that we have in the library. So the price is a lot. So this is over the bid limit, which really complicates. I'm still ascertaining the level of emergency that this is. Like, so one of the sections is cracked and it is leaking, seeping water. It's going to need to replace. So I believe there is an option to try to replace the section. It's a lot of labor. It's a very labor intensive process to replace that section, but I believe this still exists. I do not yet have a cost estimate for that. They were happy to provide us with a cost estimate to replace the boiler. It's certainly the recommended action. It's a lot of, if depending on the price of replacing a section, it could be a pretty high expense for something that ultimately needs to be replaced. In any case, there's a lot of arguments for this to replace it, but it is over the New York State, not even our policy, over the New York State limit that we have to bid out a project like this. And because it is working, trying to figure out how much of an emergency this is, is it, if it's something that was going to explode or stop working, that's a bigger issue. I do want to reiterate that it is not our only source of heat in the building. This provides auxiliary heat and tempering of the air that comes in through the heavy lift, which is done by the air handlers on the roof, which we just replaced in the HVAC project. So if it dies, we're not left without heat all over the building. There certainly would be pieces of the building where we wouldn't have heat. So this is an emergency. I don't know how much of an emergency this is yet. I am trying to get prices. I'm trying to get people to come in and give me quotes on this actively right now. It's unfortunate that the board meeting fell when it did because I don't have better information for you, but this is the information that I have right now. As it sits, I did talk to the train representative and say that this needed to be, it's just way too high. It's over $35,000. We have to send this out to bid. And he said he could try to work it through a procurement contract, which sort of like New York State contract. There are other government procurement contracts that exist, and it may be that we will be able to purchase it through that without the need to go through the bid process. At the same time, I have we did have a meeting with Paul from Butler Roll and Mays, and I've asked some questions of him if he can get in contact with the engineer that they were working with for our long range plan process, so we could maybe bring the engineer and have them come in and give me some advice on that as well. So that's all in progress, but nothing has moved on that for me to talk about tonight.
Can you remind me how old the current boiler is?
So it was put in 95, which actually surprised me that it was as recent. I mean, it's old, but as recent as it was. The building was built with electric baseboard heat in 72, and then had the air handlers retrofitted to the building by 82. So in 10 years, they decided, electric baseboard heat is a terrible idea. They installed the air handlers on the roof. I thought the boiler went in at the same time as that, but that turns out the boiler went in, a decade later in 95, which turns out to be a good thing, because if it had been put in 84, there would be a very high chance that the caulking that was in between the sections would have been asbestos. So by 95, that asbestos was no longer an issue. Thankfully, it's 100% sure that we do not have asbestos in our boiler. So if we do replace it or fix it, it doesn't need to be abated and then fixed, or abated and then replaced. So that's not a danger, which is an awfully nice problem not to have, because that would complicate things. I had about 3 hours of an absolute panic attack for that. So this is not great. It needs to get fixed in some way, shape, or form, but it's not as terrible as it could be.
Jeff, the hot water heater is feeding just the bathrooms and the kitchen
sinks, bathrooms. We don't have a ton of use for domestic hot water. We're not taking showers in the library. We don't run washer and dryer or a washer. So the other domestic uses of domestic hot water are not much. So that option, I mean, it'd be nice to just run burner, rather than two, but for $11,000 seems a pretty steep price to me to install something that is used.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what other vendors come back with. That particular line item to me looked like about $2,000 worth of hardware. So I don't know how they get to $8,000 of counting their money. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, it'll be good to see what other quotes we can get on this. It sounds like we have some time to get some quotes. That's
right. So the people I've been able to talk to so far are trying to sell me a boiler. I'm just trying to say, is this, if this something that needs to, it's not been shut down, right? So it's not an emergency in that way that we need to shut this thing down, but it may well be that it, we're coming into the winter. It's not an ideal time to not have a boiler. I don't know what the lead times are on ordering new boilers. I don't know if the replacement boiler is itself off the shelf. The way they've been described to me, the new boilers are much more efficient and much smaller. So our boiler, which is currently the size of sort of a big generator, big generator, is going to be, it's going to sit on a pad in there and be much smaller if we decide to replace the boiler. So.
Yeah, the other thing we should probably expect is if the efficiency of the old one goes from 75% to 95% on the new one, right? We should be saving a couple of $1,000s, I think, a year in gas, or is it less than that?
I think it's less than that because I haven't been able to determine yet a way to figure out how much gas is being burned by the boiler and how much gas is being burned by the air handlers. The only time of the year when the air handlers are off that the boiler is on is in the summer when the boiler is barely running and just doing a little dehumidification. Like it runs, but it barely sits there. The new ones do scale. So in the summer when it needed to be running, it would be running at a much less intensely. Right now, ours is either on or off. So what just happens is it's on a little bit and off a lot in the summer, and it uses that hot water in there. The new one would scale that amount of hot water, so it would be using less. But in the summer, we use very little gas. So I actually think I wouldn't come here and argue for the replacement of this from an efficiency basis. Efficiency is a nice thing to have. I think any new boiler is going to be much more efficient.
Yeah, but it's not going to pay for itself in this case.
No, I'd love that. I think I think the ROI on this is going to be out there pretty far. So, the argument for replacement is just, listen, we've never had a cracked section ever. We have a cracked section now. There's 5 other sections in there. We replace one. What are the chances those other sections are going to crack at some point in the future? It's going to happen. Is it time? Is 1995 old enough that it's time to replace this boiler? So it's an expensive item, but it is not we certainly have money in the budget to replace. This is why we have a capital line in the budget, is literally for items like this. This is what we have that for. So I apologize for not being able to have put a whole package and a proposal together for you, just because there's so many unknowns about the procurement process right now. But I did want to give you as much information as I have.
Jeff, I know you said they didn't give you any information about how long it would take. That's one of my biggest concerns about going into the winter. How long would it take to get this? And also, where is it coming from?
Yep.
I mean, when we did the HVAC and we got like a little out of the blue and it was like, oh, your stuff's coming from Mexico, or like wherever it was coming from was a surprise to us. I'm almost wondering if the fact that they're not saying anything is it's not a long turnaround time. Maybe it isn't a big deal and they don't want to tell us that. They want to push us into doing that. But I am concerned about that, the lead time on this.
That I think that may be an important factor when we get a little bit more information about just replacing the one individual section on the boiler. I think the lead time on that is not an off-the-shelf item. I think those sections of boilers for this, they said they're available. What does that mean? And what foundry do they have to go to make it? That is a question. So it may be that, again, that's something I will actively look into is replacing that section. Is that going to be 3 months versus replacing the boiler might take 30 days or 20 days or something much faster than that. So
are you, I don't think you're asking for us to do anything.
I wish I could even ask you to do something. I think if it is shut down and it is not working, that is an emergency. And I think at that point we move forward in an emergency way. I think we would say, hey, we don't have time for us to go through the procurement process on this. We have an extended procurement process. We're going to have to do something modified and do it quickly if the thing was broken down, because having this is going to be an emergency. Not having this boiler would be an emergency. Mm-hmm. But for now, it's still operating, and that's why I was trying to talk to an engineer to say, what is this likely to continue to, it's seeping, but it could work for another 4 months. You got to get on this. Do I have that kind of time? Or is this, no, it's going to get shut down imminently in the next 10 days. I don't have that answer. So we're working on that answer, and I will get it to you as fast as I can.
All right, that sounds good.
So Jeff, and I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying, and I'm trying not to repeat. So at the same time, even if we don't declare it an imminent emergency tomorrow, we are still then looking to get bids.
Yes.
Okay. So how long do we look for something that we may never be able to get? And how do we proceed if X weeks down the road, it is not an imminent emergency, but we cannot get bids? What are our options at that point?
Right. So that's where we might say, hey, it's going to be difficult for us to get bids. That's why I wanted to talk to an engineer. How would we move? What does this process look like? One of the suggestions from Scott at Train was that they then move towards a procurement contract with another government entity that we could sign on for that would fix the price under the terms of that procurement contract. And we could move forward under that without the need to bid the project.
I think that perhaps we should be talking to our lawyer at this point about, I think that I'm gleaning from what you're saying. This is like a state level mandate that we need to bid it.
Yep.
Okay. I think we need to be on a parallel track, talking to our lawyer and finding out what our options are. That's my opinion. Caroline, what do you think?
So this is not my area of expertise, but I absolutely agree that best to find out our options now, just so that we know.
Yeah, from the standpoint of our options and how we might want to proceed. Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Okay. Harmeen, anybody else have opinions on that?
I think it cannot hurt to speak to the lawyer.
Yeah,
Right.
So
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so you'll get us more information and
I will.
by email. We'll, if it's something that you can communicate by email in between board meetings.
Yep.
Okay, great. The emergency patron conduct policy.
Okay, it's on page 36. Just a quick update. We've already implemented the changes. I just wanted to bring the policy to you for approval.
Yep.
The two changes are highlighted in the red text. We're adding that masks with valves, as recommended by the CDC, are not an acceptable alternative face covering for use in the library, as well as mesh masks, sort of any mask that's made out of a doily or lace or open weave to the point where you can see through it.
Yeah.
Jeff, I looked at this earlier and your changes seem very reasonable. I have one other question.
Sure.
On the existing language. In the emergency section, the second to last item, public computer equipment will be provided at the director's discretion. At this point, since we are, still unsure when we will be making our computers available, I'm wondering if we may want to change that word from will to may. I know it's a small change, but
we could, we are offering the public PCs, we are offering the Chromebooks for checkout. And so we have some ability to have public computer use right now. So that's the reason, but we could say may. There's,
Are you getting any pushback about this? People pointing to this policy saying the director can do this for me, about people using it in the library. That's what I'm concerned
No. I think there's certainly questions about that people want this is a real question. We are going to move forward this week. What we're implementing is the most common question. We're sort of parsing out what the needs of PC use is, and the thing that people need to be able to do is print. A lot of people don't have a printer at home. So the first thing we're going to set up is a printing station in the library that will allow people to come in. And we're not, I don't know if you've ever printed at the library, but there's a release code. You can send your item into the library and you tap on a little keyboard and it prints your thing. We're just going to have a PC, 15-minute time limit, a printer hooked right up to it. You just come in, put your flash drive in or whatever, check your email, download the thing you need to do it, print it, and away you go. So we're gonna try to make that as easy as possible because the online printing is working and the librarians are doing a great job ushering people through that process, but it is a little difficult. So we're trying to make this the thing I'm going to solve first, and that's this week. So.
Okay. So if there's no need to change what I was just talking about, if everything is working and you're not getting any problems, this policy looks good the way it is to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's one other change is about the accompanied child, the age of the accompanied child.
So the things in yellow were actually already changed in we made them, we put them in yellow to make it very apparent that this is different from our traditional patron conduct
Okay.
policy. So that's,
Okay.
yeah, sorry, that's about sort of this document is for public purposes. So it's those things that are highlighted yellow, we are not changing. They were already changed in the emergency
Got it. Okay.
plan. It's just adding those two things in red, the masks with valves and mesh masks.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on that? Concerns? Okay, I'll take a motion on that.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries. Thanks. So any other new business? Any new business?
I have one question.
Okay.
I think that we saw something that was not going to be any kind of staff training and staff development day in December.
That's correct. We're not having staff development day this
Okay.
December.
Is there any, I don't have any suggestion for the board to do anything to recognize the staff for their efforts during the year, which we usually do at that meeting.
About that, yeah. Yeah. Maybe
Yeah,
we could offline and Mary, maybe we could do a separate email to figure out some ideas there. I think it's a good idea to recognize the staff. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially this year.
I don't know how we do it. And
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
it doesn't have to be that day because there is no that day, but.
Correct.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
We've had a
Well,
lot of staff training.
Right.
It's usually in the form of food, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we could provide something like that in the break room.
Right.
The problem is that the thing about that day was such a high percentage of the people were there one day.
That's nice.
That's the problem with it. But we'd have to think about it. We'd have to think about what we might do to recognize them in some way.
Yeah, we can brainstorm.
Yeah. Okay. We'll take that offline and do that by email. Okay. Any other new business? Okay. Any old business, long range planning? Any update?
Yeah, so Jeff and I met with Paul. Jeff, please feel free to chime in.
I will.
To walk him through sort of the idea that we had talked about last time about a phase 1 and a phase 2 approach to a long-term plan. Right, the idea being that phase 1 would be a smallish or smaller, right, improvement to the library and its structure. Right, something on the order of $2 million. Right, that's just a sort of a approximation number, right, to get everybody centered. And then phase 2 would be something bigger. The idea being that phase 1 would be in the near term, right, call it 3 to 4 years ish, right, and the second term would be something longer. And we gave him the down select list of priorities that the committee had talked about, that the library staff had developed, right, looking at specifically a larger seating area, right, out on the lawn, right, to sort of replace our large meeting room area, improvements to the building to consolidate the reference desks,
Covering
deal with the awning / covering, right, to deal with the icing issues on the patio, right. Those three, I think, were the top ones. Jeff, I'm leaving anything out?
Yeah, that's good. Yes.
Right, okay. So in terms of scope, right, what we gave him was a request to sort of go off and then hone the schemes to focus on delivering those items, right, as part of a phase 1, right, that we could then come back and put in front of the board. Questions?
Yeah, did you talk about the Borthwick property at all, or?
That was my question.
Thank you. Yes. No, I'm sorry. And Harmeet and I both blanked on that. So I'm going to take that was on me. I should have had that list up. So it was deal with the Borthwick property, deal with the walkway, some sort of expanded community room space, and then some kind of interior consolidation.
Okay.
Borthwick is important. We got to do something. We've got to do something to recognize it. Yeah.
Unanimous on the committee, and they heard that loud and clear. I think that was, I think his his goal is to have this long range plan wrapped up for us by the end of this year. So that's, they've taken our information and they're gonna go work on that, and then they'll come back and meet with the committee, and then that would come back to the board. So.
Can I ask, is the first phase with that? Remember how the upstairs offices have those stack holes in the middle of them? Is that part of the for phase one? Is that be okay?
Future phase, unfortunately. I mean, that's if we are using Harmeet's very gross terminology of $2 million, and that's just, Harmeet's got a great way to explain it. 2, 10, 50. These are how projects fall in. That's how big the projects are, right? So if we're talking about the 2 project, that absolutely does not include that sort of major construction that would involve the redoing of the interior of the library that would allow us to gain that space upstairs. Okay. So, it would be a great thing to have, but when we look, when the committee and our architects looked at the things that the community really said they wanted, that they really said that they needed, that's not one of those things. So
that's probably because they haven't seen it, but that's another thing too. I mean, to see it actually too was astounding. But okay, Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions, comments, concerns from that? Okay.
Don't yet have another committee meeting date, correct?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay. Phrase reopening.
Okay, so just on page 38, I just wanted to quickly show, this is a chart that was put together by the New York State Library and the Division of Library Development, which I was actually very thankful for. They did a survey of public libraries across New York State and said, just where are you? What are you doing? So this was actually very helpful to me as we looked at where we are, what services are we offering, what are public libraries actually offering across the state as a way for us to benchmark. I know what our close neighbor libraries are doing, but I don't know what libraries are doing across the state. So, I just think as you look through, on-site meetings allowed, on-site programs, still just a very small percentage of libraries are offering those. About 25% of libraries are offering access to tables and seating, right? So we're not offering that at all yet right now. About a quarter of libraries across the state are. And then access to public PCs and to the stacks, about half. We're offering one and not offering the other one, or offering it in a very modified way right now. And then access to the circ desk and access to the curbside or lobby service. So this I just thought was helpful, and it helped me as we're framing our discussion and trying to figure out what what's our next move, and where are the other libraries in New York State who are in similar situations to us, looking at their local communities and trying to provide services to their communities as well.
Yeah, and I would ask the board also, what are we hearing from the community? I mean, I'm hearing still positives on what's been done so far, but I haven't really heard anything about, we wish you were open more hours, or curbside was longer or shorter. I mean, I'm not going to hear shorter, but I don't know if people have heard from the community at all.
The thing I hear most from people is, and it might be, an age thing, is just needing space for studying.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot. I really wish the library had a table I could use, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. So.
Yeah, there's just a lot of virtual students home right now, even college students, not just from school, but yeah, the college students that just have nowhere to go study.
Right.
It's the nature of the beast at this point.
Yeah.
Jeff, the curbside lobby service numbers, I mean, 30% of libraries are not even offering that.
Yes, or the thing is, the way the survey was written, could it be that some libraries skipped right over that, didn't do curbside or lobby service, may have just waited, and we have some of these libraries in the area where the difference between curbside service and just opening the front door and letting someone step in and pick up their book is immaterial. The library is small enough. They just, knock on the door if you want to come in, and we'll open it up and hand you your book. So, but yeah, so I think the numbers that I took as particularly interesting for us with the access to the circulation desk, that about half of libraries across New York State still are not letting people in the library. I mean, for maybe perfectly valid reasons, but they're not letting people into the library to have actual access, to check out themselves. That's one of them. And then access to the stacks is even less than that. There's some people that we could have done that. We could have had people come in and have access to the desk, but then have closed stacks, and we would have run around and gotten books for them. I just think by the time we got there, we didn't feel that was necessary. And frankly, aggregating people at a circulation desk is worse than letting them disperse around the library and pick out their own books, right? So right now that actually keeps the number of people per square foot down. If they're distributed out in the stacks, that's fine. They come up and check out either through the self-checkout or at one of the circulation desks. And that's why if you come in, there's 3 checkout points where you could actually check out with a human being, and that's to spread those lines out. We don't want people to be lined up tightly with each other. We want to keep them separately.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, there was just there was a great vacuum of information on this, and I found it very helpful to me as I was thinking about things, and I thought it would be helpful for you two to just understand, where we were with public libraries in New York State.
That's helpful. So the next piece would be this printer.
Yep.
Piece. And then see how that goes in a trial period. And then do you have a next piece after that, or
public? So the two so public PCs would be sort of a couple computers out there for people to come in and access and just do regular internet browsing, absent of printing. We're trying to separate those two things out from each other. Normally we try to have one station do everything for everybody. All the stations are fully functional with scanning and printing and everything. We're trying to separate those functions out a little bit, just to because the time needed to do each of those things are different, and we're going to have to clean the stations off in between each use. So we've got that, and then the Saturday hours, expanding to full day Saturday hours. I think that per hour, the density of people is the highest on Saturday. We had 154 people in last week, and a couple times we were at the 20 limit and had to have people wait before they could come into the library, and that's not great service. We understand there's a reason that we have limits on the building, but that's not great. If we could extend those hours, I'm hoping that pile up that happens right at 1 o'clock would be lessened, as people who want to come in earlier can come in a little bit earlier. And once everything gets rolling, it's actually pretty smooth. But if you have something that causes an artificial pile up, then it takes a while to work your way through that pile up. So,
okay.
But we're not experiencing that at all during the week. We haven't, maybe on a Friday, which is our busiest per hour day now in person, you might get for a second someone has to wait before someone they can go on in the library. So,
and then just to continue that discussion, I think last month I think we had a little bit different thought that we were going to focus first on Saturday and Sunday hours before the computers. Yep. But in the interim, we've had some issues with people being out with COVID things, not illness, but just needing time.
Yeah, I'm super grateful that we have not had a COVID case among the staff at the library yet. But so the not this last week, but the week before that, I was actually quite shaken by the number of people who had to be out. There where a person in their house was under quarantine. We know Bethlehem had a little spike locally, so we're not immune to that. We had to have people, 4 or 5 people out at any given time for these sort of COVID adjacent reasons. That made this inexorable march towards more opening and more hours, made me realize quite what a house of cards. One of the things you asked me to do was prepare our minimum staffing levels as we looked for Saturday and Sunday. My reaction is to those 2 temp positions that we have to try to put more people where we need them on those hours. And but we realized how close we were to the vest. For both circulation and public services. If we had a couple key people out, we had started to move away from having folks in like the IT department or the administration staff covering circulation functions, running books out to the library, me, some other folks doing those work. And we're not going to be able to get away from that anytime soon. It's not the end of the world. It's just, all those other things that I'm supposed to be doing, and the folks in IT are supposed to be doing, and the admin people are supposed to be doing, then stop as we focus on our core, which is making sure we're getting books into people's hands. But that's, as we have more people out, we have to pull, I'm happy that we have those resources to pull in, and we keep everything functioning. But it's, it made me realize literally there's a lot more risk there than I think maybe I was acknowledging. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for keeping us in the loop on all that
Yeah.
background information.
But I still think Sunday, Sundays and Saturday mornings might happen closely in tandem with each other. If we can get the staffing in place for those without pulling too many people from during the week, then that's my goal, is to open up, because I know those hours would be popular. So
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
And you mean on this issue or additional old business?
Well, first on this issue, and then we'll go to other old business.
Okay. Not on this issue, no.
Okay. Then any other comments on this issue? Right. Charmaine?
Not on separate issues. I think I'm still the only person on the personnel committee. So before something comes up, before you need a committee, I'm again asking someone with some experience to join me on that. If that, in fact, I am the only person on the personnel committee, that would be helpful. I also know I was on the policy committee, and we made some tentative revisions to some policies. I'm not sure how those get queued up for the rest of the board,
right,
for approval or review.
Yep, that's me. We'll get back on that. I apologize. Yep.
Okay, and then if there's any others that you feel should be, continuing the phases of going through anything that needs to be, because I think those discussions were helpful, and I just wasn't sure if there were other things that just need to be moving through in terms of policies.
Yeah. So I've got just generally speaking, Christine McGinty is focusing right now on updating, looking at a number of our policies, including the staff handbook we've been looking at, and that will go to the policy. That's going to be a major review, a major revision. There's a lot involved in the staff handbook, and then a number of other policies. So there's enough work for the policy committee there, and it will be more of a question of prioritizing which of those policies we want to take a look at first, and where we're going to focus your energies.
Yeah. And then just the last thing I have is there an update on I think, or maybe I just forgot, the awning, or what we're calling it, between the loading dock and the curbside? Is there?
Yep. So there is the update is we're not going to move forward with that. The type of awning we got to have, was not going to be able to be installed before the spring.
Right. I remember that part.
So what we're doing instead, talking to the maintenance supervisor, we have ordered extra melt mats that we use in the front. We use these electric mats that melt the ice and keep that safe. So we kind of have a T shape out. If the weather were to get really inclement, we would collapse down to sort of spot 2 and 3 for curbside pickup, those 2 middle spots, and we would have that area cleared of snow with those mats. And then at that point, because the maintenance staff are the staff members that are queued up to go outside, they would be the final delivery. So it would be the circulation staff would deliver it to the maintenance staff, and the maintenance staff, because they're coats and boots and they're ready to go outside, they would be doing the final delivery out to the cars. So
thank you.
Not an ideal use of them, but I think safer, safer to do. We had, it was safe. We didn't have any snow, but we had staff members running in and out, your coats on and off all day long, popping out of the back as they're running books out back and forth. Absolutely possible, absolutely abnormal. So
the Bobcat, get the Bobcat.
The Bobcat to deliver it. What's it? Drones,
right? Robots, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I had thought, I keep, 3 months ago, me really thought that as we opened up the library, the demand for curbside would drop, and that is just not the case. So
yeah.
People love that curbside.
Curbside, people love it. Yeah. Okay, any other old business? Any other issues people want to discuss tonight? Otherwise, we'll do another public participation check.
Thanks for the reminder, Mark. Sorry. Usually I have that queued up.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay, great. So I'll call for a motion for adjournment then.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried.